وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
Today's program is brought to you by Utica Schools in Zia 1 and Zia Flam.
Welcome to the United States. Please proceed to the passport control. ماذا يقول؟ إلى أين أذهب؟ ماذا علي أن أفعل؟ لو سمحت، هل تساعدني؟ ماذا قال هذا الرجل في الإعلان؟
ألا تعرف الإنجليزية؟
أعرف، ولكن أساسيات فقط.
عليك بتعلم اللغة.
ولكن أين؟ يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام، أساتذة متخصصون، منهج متميز، يمكنك التسجيل طوال العام. لرسوم التسجيل ومواعيد الفصول الدراسية عليك الاتصال بالهاتف رقم
586-797-6960 586-797-6960.
تحدث اللغة وتعلم نمط الحياة مع يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام. تعلم، تحدث وأكثر.
مع أقوى الأفلام مدبلجة.
يمكنكم مشاهدة قناتي زي ألوان زي أفلام على ديش نتورك أو على سلينك بلاتفورم.
الدنيا مسرح كبير على زي أفلام، لذا عليك أن تصنع قصتك بنفسك.
From India.
زي ألوان ستبهركم بكل حصري وجديد.
زي أفلام دخلت بيوت جميع عشاق بوليوود، وزي ألوان لونت عالم بوليوود. لا تفوتوا مشاهدة أجمل الأفلام على زي أفلام وزي ألوان.
يمكنكم مشاهدة قناتي زي ألوان زي أفلام على ديش نتورك أو على سلينك بلاتفورم.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNZK 690 AM and WZNZ 700 AM.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
Good morning, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to a new program on Radio Baladi on US Arab Radio.
Donald Trump's first 100 days in office definitely have been unusual on so many different fronts. Travel bans, executive orders, domestic policy, foreign policy, but also there has been his usage of Twitter, which has also been unusual as well. Our topic this morning is to tweet or not to tweet, the effect of @RealTrump on shaping the political discourse in the United States. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic is Dr. Susanna Flores, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in social media expression and addiction. She's a keynote speaker and author of the book Face Hooked, How Facebook Affects Our Emotions, Relationships, and Lives, which has been published in 2014. As a social media expert and commentator, she appeared in many different media platforms, including Al Jazeera, NPR, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and many others. Welcome to the show, Dr. Susanna.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. We're happy to have you with us for the very first time on US Arab Radio, and we hope it's not going to be the last time. Let me start by asking you first, you are a clinical psychologist. What got you...
عيلة عريقة بترويها منتجات أصلية جود ذهب تشهد إلها إنها وكبرت معنا كل بيوت تلاقيها العيلة وجيراني وأهلي ما بدوروا إلا عليها لأنه زياد يا جدي بتجيب المنتج بلدي بلدي وبتخليني أتذكر أصالة وعراقة بلدي.
أجود المنتجات الغذائية من عائلتنا إلى عائلتكم.
It's never too early to get your child on the right track. From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center in Troy works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. The highly qualified and experienced staff use a variety of programs that can help nurture important personality traits like responsibility, independence, problem-solving, motivation, and respect. They also have educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants, toddlers, transitional toddlers, and pre-K to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. They're open from 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., can provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and can also arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Troy is located at 37373 DeQuinder, just above 16 Mile Road, and can be found on Facebook at Dreamy Children's Center. Ask about the free preschool program. Call today, 248-680-9170, 248-680-9170.
Welcome to the show, everybody, and my guest this morning is Dr. Susanna Flores, a clinical psychologist. We're going to be talking about Twitter and how Donald Trump has been using Twitter and what the effects and implications are on the political discourse in the United States. Dr. Susanna, you're a clinical psychologist, and I want to ask you, how did you get interested in this area of studying social media and social media effects and impacts?
Well, around 2008, 2010, I was in private practice, and I began to notice a different dynamic in my clients' presentation. All of a sudden, people began talking about Facebook and how it was affecting their relationships. So, for example, people would tell me that there was marital discourse, or that they would break up with their boyfriends or girlfriends because of something that someone posted, or jealousy, or that the social media was ruining, or interaction on social media was ruining friendships of 20 years. And so I started studying it, and I began talking to other colleagues who agreed that all of a sudden we are having a new dynamic in our clients, the way that our clients were presenting. And so I was beginning to think, okay, this is going to be the new wave in clinical presentations. And there were doubt from my colleagues, and I said, you know what, wait, because something is happening. And sure enough, I started noticing more and more stories pertaining to toxicity until I was talking about it. My friends were encouraging me, like, well, maybe you should start writing about it. But it wasn't until one particular story when one of my clients came, or he called me in a panic. He asked for an emergency session, so I met him at the office, and he told me that his friends notified him that he needed to check his profile immediately, or his girlfriend's profile immediately, And so his fiancée had changed her relationship status from engaged to in a relationship with, and substituted his name and photograph for that of his best friend.
Oh,
and
wow.
needless to say, like, I'm usually not a person who's speechless. I was speechless. I just had to let that sink in for a while. And my mouth just dropped open. And these were professionals in their 40s. These were not teenagers. And so he called her, of course, immediately to confront her. And she said, well, it's true that they've been an item for about 4 months. And she thought it was time to let him know. And then my response was on Facebook. And his phone was ringing off the hook. His mother, like, they were all connected on social media. So basically everyone knew that his engagement was over before he did. And so he just said, you know, the words, "I want to die." And we talked about that for a long time, and we decided it was probably in his best interest to go to the emergency room and to get him evaluated. And in all my years of practice, I never witnessed anyone so enthusiastic or so motivated, not enthusiastic, but definitely motivated to go inpatient, because he was like, take my laptop, take my phone, take everything. He just wanted to be unwired. So it was not just the trauma of the breakup and how it happened, but it was mostly like the public humiliation that followed. And at that moment, that's when I decided to write my book, because I was sitting there in the emergency room just thinking, like, what is happening to people? You know, how is it possible that you know, people would think that it's appropriate, you know, to share such public information, or to share such information in such a cruel way, completely dismissing how, or any insight as to how it would affect someone so, you know, emotionally. And that led to other stories. So, like, you know, to date, I think I assisted individuals with hospitalization about 2 to 3 times now, because of, it's not social media, it's the interactions. So that led to my interest in beginning to talk to people. And I was in Chicago. And, you know, I decided, you know, aside from talking to psychologists, I needed to talk to the layperson and just, you know, get some answers. So it was in the middle of the winter. I held up a big sign that said, "Talk to me about social media." People looked at me like I was a crazy person, of course, right? But little by little, people began approaching me, and they were curious. And then before I knew it, I had a big crowd with people wanting to talk about, you know, like how both the positive and the negative effects of social media. And then shortly thereafter, I opened up the questions to the Facebook audience, and before I knew it, I mean, it just kind of waved, you know, like I was getting responses from all over the world, you know, people wanting to share both positive and negative stories. And so, you know, and that launched the book in 2014, Face Hooked.
Before we get to the book, Face Hooked, and you said a couple of things that really struck my attention. The first one was the word toxicity, and the second one was the word unwired. You know, it's really interesting. You are a clinical psychologist, and you've been witnessing all of these cases where, you know, social media obviously can become such a very integral part of our lives in so many good but so many bad ways as well. Obviously, the pros and cons. But the word toxicity, if you can explain to us a little bit what that really means.
Well, we talk about relationships being toxic when they are no longer, you know, first and foremost, they're no longer bringing anything positive to our life. You know, like, you know, someone is no longer making us feel, you know, that our sense of self-worth is positive, or, you know, like, they just don't make us feel good, you know. And on the definitely more toxic level, or dysfunctional level, people are either manipulating us, or an interaction is manipulating us, or making us question reality or question ourselves. And so another word for it, very popular, is gaslighting. You know, people are confused. You know, people are thrown off. They begin to question their own realities, or they begin to question information or messages that they're receiving. And that is leading to symptoms such as anxiety or depression. In some cases also, you know, obsessiveness, you know, OCD, or obsessive compulsive behaviors. And
so if I get you right, this level of toxicity and gaslighting that you're talking about, that can be one of the damaging or negative effects of the excessive usage of social media.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, like, sometimes when I speak about this subject, people are, you know, sometimes surprised that, you know, they're like, well, you know, can it really? I'm like, yes, it really can, because, you know, we're receiving multiple messages from multiple sources multiple times a day. And so, you know, like, I don't know if we were necessarily designed to process that much information at one time, and we'll talk about that in terms of the political messages.
Definitely,
but,
definitely.
Think of it as information overload.
Absolutely,
and
information overload. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
yeah,
so that
information overload can be very damaging.
Yes, especially when we're receiving negative messages or too many at one time.
Absolutely, and many people would be at the same time, although they have all of these damaging effects we just talked about and this level of toxicity, they can still be afraid of being quote-unquote unwired. This young man who said, he was going through this trauma and, just put me somewhere where I'm completely unwired. Sometimes if your phone freezes and you're not able to be on social media anymore and you cannot connect, you get this panic attack and you're like, my whole life has stopped. So although there's all of this toxicity, you can still be scared of being unwired, correct?
Absolutely. And there's so many studies talking about how overexposure to social media is leading to depression. And I think people feel that on a certain level, like they're exhausted, especially with the political stuff. They're exhausted, but they cannot stop. No one can stop, right? So it's a balance between, being informed and being overwhelmed. But because there is a serious addictive factor to social media, where our push notifications, there's studies that are showing that they're actually triggering areas of the brain that are meant for food and sex. So we're getting, we're getting dopamine hits. There's even, so therefore I'm just kind of, expressing that there's even a neurological component to the addiction, where we cannot stop. And as you mentioned, when your phone freezes up, yes, you do experience a mini panic attack. And I would call that like a cocaine withdrawal. The same symptoms. Your hands begin to shake, you begin to panic, you become, only focused on getting back on social media. That's the only thing that you really think about at that moment. And you experience what teenagers or what millennials are calling FOMO, fear of missing out, fear of not being connected at that moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before we move into the political, stuff and talking about, Donald Trump and how he uses Twitter, which is the topic of today's discussion, just give us a brief idea about your book, Face Hooked, that has been published in 2014. What was the reason or the motivation behind writing this book, and what was, very briefly, the essence or the core ideas you're trying to get across in this book?
The core ideas were about, like the way that we're using social media. Like I am a social media fan. I don't want anyone to think that Face Hooked is a book about, like, you should stop using social media. I think it's an incredibly awe-inspiring and powerful means of communication, but it's more about, like, let's take a look at what's happening. We're becoming less authentic. We're more focused on editing and re-editing and embellishing and photoshopping, much more focused on the self. And so most of us do edit our posts. So even those of us that think that we don't, you do, because you will type something and then you press delete, 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 and you craft it and embellish it until you feel this will get me the more likes, right? Or this will be more acceptable. That leads to the validation-seeking behavior, right? Like, please tell me you like me so that, that will represent my self-worth. And, where before, like we would rely perhaps on the inner voice, and now we're relying more on the external noise of the opinions of others. And because we feel that need for validation, that is also compromising our privacy, right? Where our friends, before social media, our friends were our friends. Now on social media, our friends, or at least our digital friends, they're not so much our friends, but they're our audience, and we've become performers. And so the nature of social media encourages us to share more and more about ourselves. So in times past, we knew what privacy was, but the newer generations, they absolutely do not. Where in our time, perhaps, we knew that whatever happened in the grocery store, that was public. Whatever happened in the bedroom, that's private. But nowadays, the lines have become so blurred that we've lost our sense of self, and that's a really important component to being a human being. Well, we can discuss that later. There's also a privacy issue with politics, too.
Yeah. I do like this part about the audience and the performers, being a performer, and also there's the point about the friends. I think that there's a study that shows that the more friends you have on social media, the less friends you actually have in your real life.
Yes,
which is an interesting point. Like there's this,
and it's also the more superficial these connections are. And if you think about it, we wouldn't do this in reality. You wouldn't invite a total stranger. Here, please take a look at, or the photographs of my children, or please let me, I'm going to check into the daycare where I drop them off. Let me invite you to find out where my children are. People, and again, total strangers that you think you know, but you don't. And of course we've elected the ultimate performer. Right, and a master of social media. I've called him that, and it sometimes makes people angry, but he is a master of social media. And so he's feeding into what's happening with us, even on a global level. This is not a U.S. phenomenon. This is happening all over the world. And so
let me just start by talking about this point, Dr. Susanna. I mean, this whole idea of which is today's topic, really. I had to have this intro, of course, because the audience has to know a little bit about you and about your background and why you got interested in this, and also your book, Face Hooked, published in 2014. But moving into today's topic, really about, basically at real Trump. This is really unprecedented, right? There has been a lot of things, as I said in the introduction, that have been unprecedented. To wake up in the morning to a tweet from your president, right, or to sleep at night, and the last thing you see is, again, a tweet from your president. This is a very unprecedented phenomenon. Would you like to, comment a little bit on how and why this is so unusual?
Well, 2016 marked a striking shift in how American voters received their candidate information. So, before social media, we would rely on the debates, right? Everyone would come home early to watch the debates. But now we're receiving information from our candidates directly. Not just even that, but at all times, because we're using that word wired, we're wired in, right, or we're connected. So, once again, the nature of social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever platform you're using, and the addiction factor, it tends to be the first thing you check in the morning and the last thing you check at night. And when you're receiving messages, it's not so much like, President Trump is using, Twitter, it's the particular messages he's sending, right? So they're not, and I'll just say it bluntly, they're not positive. They definitely trigger the anxiety, and they're very strategic. He uses, I've studied the way that he posts things, and he is undermining, during the campaign, he was, strategically undermining his competitors because, or in a certain way, like, certain words like that's just sad, therefore establishing like his authority, and instilling fear. So the entire campaign was, you should be very afraid, right? Like the world is doomed and I am the only person that can save you. And when you're relying on someone like that, especially someone who is so brazen, in his and so disrespectful towards others, you begin to panic. And so we were seeing, like, and even where I work, now and with our current clients, like, this is something that has continued. So he has definitely used what he knows. Like, he is an entertainer. He knows how to stir emotion. He's used this in a public platform where he has millions of followers, right? And it has snowballed into a collective consciousness of panic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing has been, as I said before, unprecedented. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about this actor, a performer part. Like, how can you turn yourself into a performer as a politician in this particular case, and in the case of Trump, and how he is using at real Trump. And we'll talk about this name in a moment. But just the whole idea of being a performer, per se, an actor. Can you talk a little bit about this particular role and how it can be best served by a social media venue or platform like Twitter?
Yes, well, he ultimately, or originally became like aside from his businesses, he is a reality star, right? And some people have compared, his use of social media, like he still thinks he's a reality star. I'd have to agree with that, and whatever side you're on the political realm, most people that I have spoken to have agreed that he should stop using it. Like the office of the presidency is too important to just, share information like that. But here is the performing part. Twitter only allows 140 characters, right? And so once again, before social media, we relied on the debates, or if there was, like, let's say, a news article, we would read the whole article because you want to be informed. But because you're only allowed a certain snippet of information, in order to grab his audience, in order to perform, he would have to make it as shocking as possible. And he understands, because he was in the media, that the more shocking, the more ratings. And so ultimately, in most cases, the candidate that we're thinking about the most, even if it's the person that we really detest, that is the person that tends to win because they're getting the most attention. So, in any entertainment industry, they'll tell you even negative attention is attention, right? So no attention is bad. So he really played into that. Now, what he also did, because he's stirring the emotions, he's encouraged us, or people anywhere in the world to weigh in on this, right? And so we started attacking. We started voicing our opinions, which we should, right? But once again, we're all under the construct of 140 characters. You cannot thoroughly explain or express yourself, especially when it comes to important global issues, in 140 characters. That's impossible, right? And yet it's happening, right? So here's what I laid down, is that, this is how social media or Donald Trump influenced the election, is that we are more and more connected. And the more connected we are, the more information we are receiving. As I mentioned before, multiple messages, multiple people, multiple times a day, right? The more information we're receiving, the more time is required to review information. That makes sense. However, the more time is required, the less time we have for other pursuits or other tasks or other responsibilities, right? So therefore, we cannot, enjoy these other pursuits unless we go to shortcuts. And this is the genius of what, and forgive it, again, I don't mean to offend anyone, but there is a level of genius in what he did, right? Because he tapped into this social media need for cognitive shortcuts, right? Because we cannot process this much information, so we will only rely on the very short snippets of information we receive, and we're making assumptions based on 140 characters. Right? And so, and that's, when we do that, we talked about overload. We don't have time to read everything. We don't even have time to read, all the tweets, right? So what's going to happen is the polarization of America and the polarization of the world, right? I am only going to read the tweets of my team, right? And I am not going to expose myself to alternative points of views because I don't have time. I'm too overwhelmed. Right, and so that has led to extreme. Well, it hasn't led to extreme points of view, but it has definitely exasperated extreme points of views. Absolutely. You are evil, you are good, you are bad, and the hashtags. The hashtag nasty woman, hashtag degenerates, hashtag sad, or hashtag alternative facts. That has perfectly played into the cognitive schemas being like a mental structure of preconceived ideas, such as a U.S. president is usually male, white, or Caucasian, and powerful. That's a schema, right? And so that has helped us organize the perceptions or the political perceptions by fitting in this information into the preconceived mental categories.
That is so interesting. I mean, you raised a number of very important points here. The cognitive shortcuts, is very important. Idea of just, summing up everything in 140 characters, even if you're talking about, global relations and international politics and relationship with other countries and domestic, economy, things which are so important that you cannot sum up in 140 characters. But he was, as you said, very clever at doing that, and also playing into the theme of polarization. We can even talk about how it creates echo chambers, and people are just wanting to be affiliated with their own network and their own associates and circles on social media. And the usage of Twitter in this way definitely deepens and broadens this sense of echo chambers and makes it even stronger. We'll come back to this very interesting and lively discussion with Dr. Susanna Flores right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
There's a cool vibe in Detroit these days, the same vibe that's at Marygrove College. We've got great career-oriented degrees that will put you on a path to your future, on campus and online. Why not explore Marygrove? You can start college this spring. Go to marygrove.edu or call 313-927-1240 to get more information. International students pay the same rate as domestic students, and let us empower you.
Welcome to the United States. Please proceed to the passport control. ماذا يقول؟ إلى أين أذهب؟ ماذا علي أن أفعل؟ لو سمحت، هل تساعدني؟ ماذا قال هذا الرجل في الإعلان؟
ألا تعرف الإنجليزية؟
أعرف، ولكن أساسيات فقط.
عليك بتعلم اللغة.
ولكن أين؟ يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام، أساتذة متخصصون، منهج متميز، يمكنك التسجيل طوال العام. لرسوم التسجيل ومواعيد الفصول الدراسية عليك الاتصال بالهاتف رقم
586-797-6960 586-797-6960.
تحدث اللغة وتعلم نمط الحياة مع يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام. تعلم، تحدث وأكثر.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects that provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNZK 690 AM, and WZMZ 700 AM.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We are discussing today to tweet or not to tweet, how at real Trump has been shaping the political discourse in the United States. And with me this morning discussing this important, timely, and interesting topic is Dr. Susanna Flores, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in social media expression and addiction. She's a keynote speaker and author of the book, Face Hooked, How Facebook Affects Our Emotions, Relationships, and Lives. Dr. Susanna, before going to the commercial break, we're talking about this phenomena of using Twitter and how Trump has been really good at it. But one thing that really struck my attention is this whole notion of polarization. You know, that the United States now is much more polarized than it ever was before. And people are so divided. They're very much at opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to political issues. Can we say that the uses of social media, such as Twitter in this case, has actually been a result of this polarization or contributing to this polarization, or both? Has it been a mirror, or has it been a reflector of this process, or a creator for it, or both at the same time?
I would argue that it has been a creator and a reflector. So I believe that it's both. I think that more reliance on familiar connections and trusted resources, as we talked about right before the break, that we're wearing blinders when it comes to other information because of the information overload, has led to a generalized way of less critical thinking more information overload, and that leads to the cognitive rigidity and fatigue, which ultimately would then lead to a refusal to review alternative points of view. And just like we talked about schemas, right? Where certain points of view need to fit into these mental structures that we have. So therefore, we've also been interpreting and misunderstanding information based on brief snippets of information. And if you cannot, explain your political view to me in brief sentences or 30 seconds,
or 140 characters.
Or 140 characters. Yeah, exactly. Then I can't hear you. It's almost like we've experienced like a collective ADHD when it comes to understanding alternative points of view. Where I do believe, and I'm aging myself here again before the era of social media. I do believe that most. No, should I say most? I do believe people were at least more open to having discussions, or at least more open to having debates about politics. So like, this is your candidate. I don't understand why. Please explain it. Now I don't even want to associate myself with you. The minute you mention this person, I have, I have no patience. I can't do it. I'm only going to surround myself with people of my team. Because I can't do that. And that's a very dangerous behavior. And although it can make us very uncomfortable to talk about subjects that definitely trigger, some emotions, some difficult emotions, it's still important to have a dialogue. Unfortunately, we're having the dialogue over 140 characters. Which is
and again,
impossible.
it deepens the sense of the echo chambers we were talking about before. You create your own echo chamber, your own virtual reality, your own cohort. You live in your bubble, and you're not even willing to listen to the point of view coming from others, like you said right now. And that's really, of course, cognitively and socially dangerous. There's no question about it. The use of
we're
the
pretty
name
much
itself.
like. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, like, we pretty much, we're, if you want to think of it like metaphorically, we are putting ourselves kind of in our own little prison, our own little bubble of our predetermined, like, mental categories or boxes, right? So, like, I am secluding myself and others like me in this box, and therefore I'm prohibiting myself from thinking, or really analyzing, such information.
And I'm not even willing, like you said, to even listen or accommodate anybody who is not with me in the same echo chamber or the same bubble, which of course has many dangerous implications. The use of the name itself. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please. Well, I was going to just share a very, very brief story of with some of the conversations that I had with millennials. I think that can also explain what's happening. When I would speak to millennials, they would why do you text? Why are you social media over conversation? And they would tell me, well, it's the pauses in conversation. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, right now you paused. And I said, yes, right? And they said, I can't handle that. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't handle that? Like silence? And they said, yes, like when you text, it's an understanding, like if someone isn't responding right away that something happened or whatever, but if we're face-to-face and there's a silence, like it makes us very uncomfortable because they've become programmed for immediate response, right?
Instant. Everything has to be instant.
Instant, right. And so that's why you see people, paying more attention or more priority to their phones versus the person right in front of them. Even on dates, you'll see this, right? And so what I think, and I said, what, I'm very concerned about that. I would tell, these groups, and they would say, why? And I said, well, if you're not comfortable with silence, that means that you are depriving yourself the ability for reflection. And if you can't reflect on your own behaviors or your own thoughts or even the thoughts of other people or their behaviors, what you're doing then, you're setting yourself up for massive misunderstandings, right? Because I am going, with this impulsivity and the way the social media is designed, like no filter, I'm just going to say things. And I said, you know what, like, you're going to affect your ability to solve problems with other people, to have direct and open communication. And what's happening in the world right now, and I predicted it in my book, where I said, like, what's going to happen if this turns into a global phenomenon, which, of course, it already was at the beginning. But I said, with this pattern, impulsivity, lack of filter, lack of reflection on a global level, we're going to see some massive problems and massive fights. And I said, and wars and all of these things. So when some people have been talking to me, like, what do you think of Trump's tweets, right? And I said, to be very honest, it is my worst nightmare realized. And I, and this is a time in my life where normally we like when our work gets validated. I am not happy that my work is getting validated because of what's happening in the world. Like at this point in time, I don't like being right, because I wish it wasn't happening.
Absolutely, I hear you. I just want to get to the point about his choice of the name, the Twitter handle, @RealTrump. That seemed to resonate with some people. Some people found this to be very attractive, and just the whole, the idea of the real Trump thing. Like, I'm authentic, I'm genuine, this is who I am. I just speak my mind and I say it as it is. Would you like to comment on the effect and the impact of that?
Well, absolutely, because then he's fitting into the schemas that there is fake news and there is reality, and it's perfect because with social media, a lot of social media interaction is based on illusion. People are putting their best self forward, right? And we know this, right? So he's tapping into like some sort of subconscious understanding that we have that, what people are posting is not necessarily true, and so therefore we shouldn't trust anybody but him because he's real, right? And his opponent at the time, Hillary Clinton, is a criminal, or she's fake, or whatever, right? So, trust me, and once again, to be blunt, that is the expression of a dictator. You should mistrust everything else, or I think he even did say, whatever news is, that says or negative polls, whatever you read about negative polls is fake. Like, and like, how could you say something like that? Like, that's ridiculous, right? But his handle, just like everything else that he does on social media, for the most part, is pretty brilliant. If it for individuals, I want to, be specific here. It's brilliant for individuals that are not used to critical thinking. Or that have become overwhelmed with social media, so they're just willing to, like, these are the masses. I'm willing to just listen to what you're saying because you self-proclaim as real.
And that gets me really to the point about the demographics. What would be the categories or segments of the audience who would be most likely to be positively impacted or affected by this type of @RealTrump 140 characters on Twitter? Demographics in terms of gender, age, educational background, socioeconomic status?
I don't know if any studies have been done on that so far. This is still very, very fresh. Of course, I have my preconceived assumptions. You might as well. I think it's very easy to say that these are, uneducated people. However, I have spoken to people that are exceptionally educated, individuals that have, that have believed everything. There is a shift. People, some people are no longer believing everything that he's saying because just like, in any other illusion, some things, eventually the truth comes out, eventually. And I think also in the face of, the polarization, people are beginning to realize, okay, this is not good. Whatever is happening is not good, and we have to shift this in a particular way. So, I think the tendency is to assume that, I think on some part, yes, uneducated. On others, for individuals that are, educated, perhaps there is some underpinning racism or sexism, or, it's undeniable that these messages were being expressed, throughout his entire campaign and are continuously being expressed. So I think that, with the disenfranchisement, the economic disenfranchisement that people have felt, they just wanted something different, and he certainly tapped into that. Like, I am not a politician, so therefore I can bring you money, I can change the world, I will get you those jobs. So you're either perhaps like, I don't want to say uneducated, but misinformed, perhaps, and I have my own biases, so I definitely need to make that known, so obviously I'm biased in this conversation. But yeah, you are either misinformed, you're, perhaps uneducated, or, there's hatred, or racism, sexism, homophobia, et cetera, that he has really, really tapped into. And many people say, like, well, those with these negative tendencies almost came out of the closet. Like, so he is our person. He is the person that keeps it real. And he's saying everything that I wish I could say, but I can't say. And so now he has empowered me to say it. And now you see what's happened as a result.
Absolutely, and there's the whole idea of being at real Trump here. I'm one of you. I'm not a politician. I'm just one of you. So even when he makes like grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes in his tweets, that appeals to some people who think like, oh, he's just like me. He can make a spelling mistake. He can make a grammar mistake. He is not a scholar or an intellectual or a politician. He is just one of us. We'll come back to this interesting discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Welcome to the United States. Please proceed to the passport control. ماذا يقول؟ إلى أين أذهب؟ ماذا علي أن أفعل؟ لو سمحت، هل تساعدني؟ ماذا قال هذا الرجل في الإعلان؟
ألا تعرف الإنجليزية؟
أعرف، ولكن أساسيات فقط.
عليك بتعلم اللغة.
ولكن أين؟ يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام، أساتذة متخصصون، منهج متميز، يمكنك التسجيل طوال العام. لرسوم التسجيل ومواعيد الفصول الدراسية عليك الاتصال بالهاتف رقم
586-797-6960 586-797-6960.
تحدث اللغة وتعلم نمط الحياة مع يوتيكا كوميونيتي سكول ESL بروجرام. تعلم، تحدث وأكثر.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
أسواق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أورشارد ليك في مدينة فارمington هيلز ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلات كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري اوت، جميع انواع المعجنات، وايضا صواني الكمبو المشكله والصمون الحار. لحوم حلال الجاليه العربيه والاسلاميه الملحمه باداره قصاب الجاليه المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 اورشارد ليك في مدينه فارمington هيلز او اتصلوا بهم على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم. اتصلوا على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمعامله الراقية وكرم الضيافة عنوان.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WZNZ 700 AM.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about At Real Trump, how the usage of Twitter is affecting the political discourse in the United States today. And with me this morning discussing this topic is Dr. Susanna Flores, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in social media usage and addiction. Before going to the break, we're talking about this unusual phenomenon of waking up to a tweet from your president. This is part of a process also known as populism, the growth of populism, where the leader, I'm just one of the people. I'm, just one of you. I'm not necessarily a politician or an intellectual. Do you know of any, historical precedents of other leaders or presidents or political leaders who have been using not necessarily social media, but media in general for this kind of populist approach?
I think this is unprecedented. I cannot, That's a very good question. I'm tempted to say that some of his messages have been reflective of other dictators. Like, you do not trust the press. You only listen to me, and the messages are following a particular sequence. And so I don't know of any other U.S. president that has behaved like this. To be honest with you, I don't know if any come to mind for yourself.
I mean, not necessarily, of course, with this kind of particular format that we are talking about, 140 characters, and
Right.
at real Trump, and you're appealing to the lay people. That I agree with you 100% is unprecedented. Although in history, of course, as you said, dictators are like, just listen to me and my message only. And we all know Goebbels, who was the media person and the media spokesperson for Hitler, when he said, basically just give me a fake news or give me some kind of misleading media, and I can give you a completely brainwashed public. So basically, the media can also be used as a tool to brainwash the public and to shape their opinions. So what could be, in your opinion, the most important pros and cons of waking up in the morning to a tweet from your president and sleeping at night, and the last thing you know is just reading another tweet from your president? What could be the pros and cons of this phenomena?
Well, the pros are that, we are more informed than ever before, and that we're getting information directly. Obviously, we are more informed in that particular way. The cons are that, truthfully, a lot of people are not sleeping well. If you're reading this right before you go to sleep, and it's eliciting negative emotions. In my book, I talk about, Facebook is powerful. So Twitter is powerful, but with anything else, with power comes responsibility. And the office is too important. And before the break, you mentioned that, like the allure of President Trump is that he was like regular people. He's not an intellectual. He's not a politician. But the reality with that office, you can't be like a regular person. You have to be experienced. You have to be an intellectual. You have to be diplomatic with other leaders that you are. This is what the office requires. And so it's not working. Obviously, it's not working because you have to be qualified. And in this respect, his use, the way he expresses himself and the use of social media, it's building walls, not bridges. And originally, social media was meant to build bridges. Like, let's connect, let's get informed, and it's being used, in a negative and toxic way. So when you're seeing a negative messages like that, it makes you want to play into it, right? Because silence can be perceived as consent, and I don't want to appear as if I'm consenting. And we're playing into this endless effort to combat misinformation. So we're trying to bring people awareness. But what I tell people with these debates and these fights, because we're so polarized right now, yes, people can change, but it takes a lot of work. It really takes a lot of work, and many times you're not going to, change someone to your team. But people, it's still important to bring, the, information, forward. Unfortunately, it's just leading to, a lot of arguments, which will eventually lead to some violence and, and worse.
I mean, again, we seem to be circling back again to the whole notion of division, fragmentation, and polarization, and also the theme of the echo chambers and bubbles, and how, really the use of social media in this kind of fashion plays into all of these things and feeds into them and creates more and more of these polarization and echo chamber effects, for sure. But also this whole notion of populism really strikes my attention, the notion that there's a populist movement. It's not just in the United States. I've been in a conference and there are scholars in Europe who are talking about the growth of populism worldwide. This phenomena of, the leader is just one of the people, I'm just one of you. We don't necessarily need experts with long CVs and resumes. People like me and you have PhDs. No, that's not appealing. So populism, this whole phenomena, what really is the core essence of this here, and how does that link into or relate to things like social media usage today? What does that mean?
Once again, it's just combating, or it's feeding into, we can't trust, other people, so therefore, or we can't trust politicians, we can't trust individuals, and I'm just going to be honest. I think that several groups were very upset with President Obama being elected, and they needed something radically different, and so they fed into someone who is polarizing America, with his speech. and feeding into the anger and the racism and everything else that has been going on. And because he doesn't have to thoroughly explain himself, again, the Twitter, 140 characters, he felt very, very at home, very comfortable, and he himself has said Twitter won him the election. I completely agree with him, 100%. Twitter won him the election. And so my advice is, to those, we always have to include, so what can we do with this, right? I would say, people need to stop arguing with those unwilling to listen. And if we do retweet information, it should be from articles that we trust. And to read full articles, again, we need to become informed, and we need to reflect again. We need to, read these articles from reliable news information. And so I think I would just say, stop feeding into what he wants us to become, which is reactive, reactive to short snippets of information without becoming informed. I don't know if that answers your question, but, that is what he's done. But this is what we can do to combat this. Instead of reacting so much to what he's saying, because everything is going to be outrageous. That's who he is, right? We focus more on the issues specifically. That's how you overcome this. And we also need to take a break.
Unwired, to make ourselves unwired for a moment, right?
Yes, well, we do, because after a while, people were beginning to have, panic attacks and sheer terror. But what's unusual about what's happening, if before the presidential election, I would say, okay, maybe you're using too much social media. There isn't any reality to it. But the panic, there was reality to it. There were many reasons why people, were legitimately, I validated their experience. Yes, you do have a reason to be anxious, and you do have a reason to be afraid, unfortunately, because of these messages that have been going out. So in my book, Face Hooked, as mentioned, this has been the prediction of, if we continue to act this way, or conduct ourselves in this way without insight, it's going to lead to, to further misunderstandings, and, it's going to affect us, physically, emotionally, and sometimes we just need to take a break. That was the point of Facebook. Become aware of what's happening, and we need balance. Social media was meant to be connective, but it was also meant to be entertainment, and so we should treat it like television. It's not reality. It's not.
Exactly. And I think when we reach the point where thinking of it as our reality, that's the problem, right? When you think of it as your lived reality, that really becomes the problem. It creates all of the things we've been talking about in terms of toxicity and all of the other stuff that we have been mentioning today. This has been a very, very lively and very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Susanna, for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Kamin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed every minute of this discussion. We very much hope to have you again with us on U.S. Arab Radio for another lively and interesting discussion. And thanks so much to all our listeners this morning. Thank you from me, your host, Dr. Sahar Kameez. And we hope to be together again on Radio Baladi on U.S. Arab Radio on another great program. Thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.
You too. Bye-bye.